Food and Wine Insider is a weekly look at a $1.5 trillion industry touching every American.
Tim Kearney is owner of Naturally Nutty Foods, and it's his wife, Katie, who's the creator of unique peanut and seed butters, initially for their 3 children from Traverse City, Michigan. Welcome to Food and Wine Insider, Tim.
Thank you very much.
Great. So tell us the story behind Naturally Nutty.
Yeah, so it started out with my wife, Katie, just playing around in our kitchen, making stuff, nut butters, seed butters, in our Cuisinart. And she wanted to change it up and create different flavors and was looking to do something where she could not only create different flavors, but also sneak in some extra nutrition, bonus nutrition, we call it. So she would add flaxseed, hemp seed, and now chia seed into everything. So our kids didn't even know it was in there. It was just a bonus. And it all really came out of the fact of her not being able to find different nut and seed butters on the grocery shelves that she could consume and feel good about. And she was looking for organic ingredients, clean ingredients without extra oils, all the extra stuff. So it turned into her own little experiment. Things kind of took off one day when we had like a neighborhood party, and she was handing out samples and got a great response. And then step by step decided to jump into a business, and we just kept going from there. It started renting out a small little space, and then picking up accounts and distributors, grocery stores. Step by step, it just kept growing and growing, and here we are about 12 years later.
So, as you said, Katie started the business somewhere back in 2007, I believe I read. In the early days, what were some of the clear challenges?
So in the early days, it's production was the main focus. How do we source ingredients? How do we get our costs in line? Jars, lids, labels. How do we get equipment that can process nut butters, seed butters? And then the focus is obviously getting sales and who do we target? Grocery stores. Actually, our first account was a school up here where we would produce, and we still have them, produce 5-pound tubs of our flavors. And Interlochen Arts Academy, it's a famous art school and music school. And so they put it in their cafeteria. And so the school and food service channel is always kind of on our radar. But the challenge is always sales and grocery. How do you get on the shelf in the grocery store because there's so much competition?
One of the things I read about the product is that Katie actually makes the products herself, which makes her rather unique among entrepreneurs in the food business because most hire a contract packer to make them. Talk a little bit about the challenges of self-manufacturing and what's involved in getting FDA approval.
Yeah, so that has been a big, from day one, Katie started, and about a year after that, I actually jumped in to the business and to help scale up and to help with logistics and sourcing and also the requirements on the USDA, FDA side, as well as organic certification, which is another level. But in the beginning, we really just wanted to keep it in-house so we could keep making it to understand that we were looking and sourcing our own ingredients and not shifting it to a co-packer or a private labeler, just to keep the integrity of everything that we're making. And so we've just kind of kept that focus and kept that mission all along to get certified and inspected. We started out with just contacting our local USDA Department of Agricultural office, and then annually they come out, inspect us, and we have also been inspected by the FDA because we're a nut butter manufacturer, and those types of manufacturers have been higher on the FDA list. So we've had full FDA inspections, full hazmat suits, where they'll take 100 swabs throughout your facility, and some of that work is done directly by the FDA, and some of it is actually contracted through the USDA Department of Agriculture, state by state.
And how much time did that take? Because that sounds like quite a process.
That can be a two-day process. Typically, it's about a 2-day process.
Well, wonderful. We're talking with Tim Kearney, who's owner of Naturally Nutty Foods, a product his wife Katie created. It's unique peanut and seed butters. So, Tim, tell us a little bit more about the products. You have, I think it's almond and peanut and seed butters. You include hemp, chia, flaxseed in the recipes. Give us some romance about the product.
Yeah, so when we first started, it was just peanut butter, and so we make organic peanut butter, just a plain Jane, pure, no sugar, no salt, and then we graduate from there, and we have some unique flavors like a butter toffee peanut butter, honey roasted cinnamon, and then we expanded to almond butter, and we source only California almonds, organic California almonds direct. And so we have a pure organic almond butter, and then we have a few flavors like vanilla almond, cinnamon vanilla almond, maple, and a mocha almond. All of our flavors, we also grind chia, hemp, and flax. And then shortly after the almond butters, we expanded into sunflower butters. So we just grind a pure organic sunflower seed, and then we have a few flavors of that. So we have a cinnamon vanilla, a chocolate, and then a pure sunflower butter. And then our variation in the seed butter category has been one of our best sellers, which is our Pepita Sun seed butter. And that's a pumpkin seed sunflower blend. And we also add organic cinnamon and allspice, which gives it a pumpkin pie in a jar, really unique, nice flavor.
We're going to return to some of your recipe thoughts, but let's say I'm a buyer for a grocery store. They have lots of nut butters, at least now, butters on the market. Talk about how you would present your products to them and what makes them so distinctive from what's on the market. Yeah,
so when we first started, there weren't a whole lot of nut and seed butter manufacturers there in our category, and different flavors and different variations. And so it was easier to talk to grocery stores. And but over the years, especially the peanut butter market has been really saturated. And so we do have some new peanut butter flavors, but really our niche has been targeting almond butters and seed butters, and especially with the school systems and the issue of peanut allergies in school systems, a lot of peanut-free schools are looking for unique variations of non-peanut, non-tree nut types of nut butters and seed butters. So the sunflower butter that we make is just a pure sunflower seed, and the Pepita is in that seed butter category where the taste is amazing, where it doesn't have strange aftertaste, and kids love it, can consume it, take it to school. And so the seed butter category has been a nice avenue for us to talk to grocery buyers and expand our line and get our foot in the door.
And that actually makes your life almost a bit complicated because you still have the peanut butters, correct?
Yeah, so there is some complications because it's still in the same facility. It's still run on the same equipment. So we do have some schools that turn us away, and because it's in the same equipment, same facility, they won't talk to us. But there are others that, as long as it's not on the ingredients and it's a clean run product with just seeds, then it kind of depends on the school district or the family and kind of the situation.
Right. Well, maybe in the future you'll have to find a way to make it more separate. Talk about
that is a goal.
Yes, I think it's really important because certainly when there's been issues of any kind of product, even candy products, people look very specifically for, was this made in a factory where there are peanuts present? And the peanut allergy thing is just extraordinary. Talk a little bit about your packaging. I have the Pepita Sun in front of me, and there's so much information on this package that's all very wonderful. It talks about small batch. It talks about made with pumpkin and sunflower. It's organic. It doesn't have palm oil. It doesn't have GMO. Wow. If I were to ask you, what's the top 3 things that you want your packaging to communicate? What are those things?
Yeah, top 3 for us, and it's going to change by the product, but organic is number 1, and actually probably number 1 would be what the product is, because it when we're at shows and markets, there can be confusion as to, is this a peanut butter, is this an almond butter, is this a seed butter? So first and foremost, we try to clean it up and let people know that actually it is a seed butter, and then it is organic, and then probably number 3 will be that it's a small batch made product versus a large line, large facility, large co-packer that's going to run it, 10,000 jars a day kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. You don't
so
just
with that small batch.
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead. Finish.
So I was going to say, with a small batch, we see it as there's more integrity, there's more contact, there's more oversight on what is actually going on with the process.
I think that's really right. You don't just promote your butters as a spread, but in recipes. Tell us about some of your more popular recipes and which products they use.
Yeah, so some of the recent ones that Katie, my wife, she is in the beginning when we started, we used to say that she would be the guru of what's inside the jar, and I would be the guru of what's outside the jar. So she would handle the recipes and concocting new flavors, and I would be the one that would handle sourcing jars and labels and lids and suppliers. And so Katie has, especially with Pepita butter, the Pepita Sun, she uses that a lot in like a frosting, so she can mix it with a frosting type of a little bit of organic sugar and thin it out, and then use that on cupcakes or cookies. Just the pure Pepita Sun she can also use with just dipping carrots, almost like as a dip, is a really unique way to use it. And then also peanut butter cups, like homemade peanut butter cups, can be used with almond butter, any of the peanut butters, or the sunflower butters, where you melt your own chocolate, and then you can combine any one of these nut or seed butters and then sprinkle a little sea salt on top after you throw those into individual cups and put them in the fridge.
Well, that all sounds really delicious. Well, we're talking with Tim Kearney. He's the owner of Naturally Nutty Foods, and with his wife, Katie, who's the creator of unique peanut and seed butters from Michigan. Tim, talk a little bit more. You were touching on this earlier about where you're distributed. And then I'd like to hear a little bit about how much of your product is sold online versus in stores.
Yeah, sure. So online sales only represent about 10% of overall sales direct to consumer. And typically we have people that order online and would prefer to buy it at a local store. So that's always the challenge with that because of shipping costs and with food. Beyond that, it's geographically we have regional distributors: Michigan, Indiana, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, a little bit of New York, New Jersey, Maryland. We're expanding into the East Coast, And then we do a bunch of direct ship to wholesalers, like a bunch of bread stores. Great Harvest Bread we're a preferred vendor for them, and they're across the country, West Coast, mountain states. And we do a lot of direct ship to smaller grocery stores, kind of the co-ops, the natural food stores. Because we're certified organic, that is a good niche for us.
Do you find wholesale is easier or more difficult to sell to than retail, and why?
You mean like a wholesale store versus a consumer off the website?
Well, I'm talking more. You're going into some food service areas. You're selling into retail that's not grocery retail, but wholesale that's also reselling your product. How are you finding the relationships in terms of wholesale versus selling directly to retail?
Yeah, it just takes a little time, and really the challenge is more of getting to the buyers and just getting your product in front of them so they can try it. That's really the issue with, I think, probably any food product. And then it's just a follow-up, because sometimes it can take 6 months to actually get into the store, depending on the store, and sometimes it can be a month. So just consistent follow-up. It's just a longer process to get into the store, but you'll usually last in that store longer than if it was a direct environment. So it's really just consistency and then product in front of them.
You talked before about being small batch. How many units are you actually able to produce yourself? In other words, are you like at capacity at this point? So
no, we're about 60% capacity, and it depends on the size of the jar that we're running. So 8 ounce versus a 16 ounce versus a 12 ounce. Typically, we can run about 2,000 jars a day.
Wow, that's a lot of jars. And
yeah, so there's a lot of glass.
When are you anticipating that you might have to expand beyond hand making, hand batch, small batch processing, or are you feeling that that's your niche and no matter what, you're always going to find a way to sort of be small batch producers?
Yeah, I feel like we could stay small batch and still grow for a good long ways and be fine. Our personal preference is not to have 50 to 100 employees and grow to a massive type of manufacturing facility. So we prefer to keep it small, and we still have some room to grow where we can still be happy and maintain that goal.
Talk a little bit about how you've also funded the business. Has it been you and Katie? Has it been family? Has it been friends? Because at the end of the day, you also need capital to keep the business going.
Yeah, it's all of the above. When we started, I rolled some old 401k money I had from a previous job, and then we've just invested from savings. We've also used some family support and then local banks, which took us a little while to get to the local bank stage just because when we started in 2007, the banks were not super user-friendly for small business startups. And so once we had a few years under our belt in sales, we were able to use some local banks and lines of credit.
Okay. And you have such a unique product because you're using pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds, and the sourcing, there must be some challenges in terms of sourcing. How do you make sure that you have consistency in the end product? Yeah,
it's always a challenge. And it doesn't matter if it's peanuts, almonds, sunflower seeds, or pumpkin seeds. So we have a few different suppliers for each category. And so we just go through a process where we have a test where product comes in. We're doing visual tests. We're sampling it before it's ground into a nut or seed butter, and then we do tests afterwards after it's ground. And a lot of the times it can be, the taste can be fine as far as the raw ingredient, but the oil content within that nut or seed can vary. And so you may have a creamy product one day, and then a supplier changes, and it may turn to a dry, mealy product just because of the oil content. So a lot of times it can be just trial and error on the supply that you get. And then we are signing contracts with suppliers, so we have usually some good consistency that way once we know that we've got a good supplier, and we can sign a contract for a year-long time period, and so we know that we should have consistent supply for at least a year.
Well, terrific. We've been talking with Tim Kearney. He's the owner of Naturally Nutty Foods, and with his wife, Katie, they've created these unique peanut and seed butters. Tim, I haven't asked you so much about pricing. I'm just really curious if you had a comparative. If the consumer's going to the store, what should they expect to pay on this versus the typical sort of peanut butter?
Yeah, so the peanut butter category is extremely competitive, and we look at ourselves as trying to compete in the organic range of products versus the conventional Jif, Skippy, even conventional natural peanut butters. So in the organic range, we are probably about $1.50 higher, depending on the size. And in the almond butters, we are actually pretty competitive in the organic space because we have a great agreement with an organic California almond supplier. We're in an annual contract with them. So our pricing is pretty competitive along the big organic almond butters in the U.S. And even the smaller ones. So that's kind of a nice niche for suggested retails. And then the sunflower butter category, we are pretty competitive in that as well, where we may be lower, 50 cents lower per jar, or maybe about 25 cents higher. We're kind of in that range where typically you can pay $6 to $7 for a jar.
Now, you've been in this business 11 years or so. Are you finding that you've come to a place of profitability?
Yeah, it's margins are tight in the food space, so it's been a long, hard road, but we are making it work, and we do have some profit, and we're always searching for ways to keep our costs down and increase our profit margins. That it's been a little challenging the last few years because we primarily only use glass, and so glass pricing has increased, and there have been some interesting things with the tariffs just as of the last couple months that has put about an extra 10% cost increase on glass, and so that's been a little bit challenging, but we've added equipment and tried to streamline our process and try to keep costs down as much as possible. So I think we have a pretty good handle on how to stay profitable in the next few years to come.
Great. And who's involved in the business today?
So I'm involved, and we have 4 employees, and then Katie, my wife, is involved as well. So we are still pretty small, but we all have different roles where I'm involved in the day-to-day handling of production management and sourcing, procurement, and then also I'm involved in some of the marketing. Katie's involved in some of the marketing as well. We do a bunch of shows around the country and do direct sales to different shows and different avenues where we look at do we want to target like a vegan type of show, or is it more organic friendly, or is it we've done some made in Michigan shows where it's mostly Michigan products.
And so
it's
talk a little. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish.
So it's a team of us that we have our own roles, but we also do crossover a little bit.
No, you said something about trade shows, and I wanted to pick up on that a little bit in terms of what role do trade shows play in the marketing of your brand?
Yeah, the trade shows, depending on the show, can be quite expensive. So it's always for us. We usually target specific trade shows. We've walked some shows, and we've this past year we won a Sophie Award for the Fancy Food Show for Pepita Sun, and so we were able to attend that. But it's always it's usually an unknown as to what you're going to get out of it, and so we found really for us a nice way is direct from us to a buyer, and try and target either a buyer at a grocery store or target the regional distributor route. And those regional distributors have nice arrangements and nice relationships with buyers. So the shows have come and gone over the years. We don't have an annual budget for some of the big trade shows.
Yeah, I will say this about trade shows. If you're present in them, they tend to signal to a buyer that you're big enough to do business with. So it's something to really think about in terms of how trade shows play a role, because in effect, you're going to see lots and lots of buyers at a trade show, whereas going to them individually, now you're a small batch and you want to expand and scale in a way that you can manage, but at some point you're going to get to a place where you're going to say, where am I at in terms of expansion here? How much bigger do I want to get? And I would love to have you talk a little bit about what are you thinking about in terms of your expansion plans and when that would happen.
So physically expanding, we're in a building where we can expand next door, and we can grow in the space. And there are other areas or other facilities in our area that we've kind of spotted to see if we need to move to that bigger space. But we have production line expansion that we are targeting, and different pieces of equipment that will help us speed up our production. And then on the marketing sales side, we've focused primarily in the Midwest, but there is a big West Coast way for us to expand, and we've been talking to distributors out there, and usually shipping is the biggest problem. But we over the years have been able to develop some good agreements with third-party logistics companies and kind of have the shipping piece dialed in. So geographically, Florida, Southeast, West Coast is a target for expansion for us in the next couple of years.
As I think I may have time for one last question. As you think about the last 10, 11 years of this business, what are one or two of the major lessons learned that you would pass on to a budding entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, there's a few things. Really trying to price your product accordingly, and try and get a good understanding of costs. And then if you have, and a lot of times it's just a guess when you're starting out, but have your best guess in front of you, and then round up a little bit, because some of the things that we didn't foresee were distributors, and then not only distributors and pricing product accordingly for a distributor, but then also sales, promotions, free fills that are all going to come off out of your margin. And then beyond that, I would say to focus on, when we started out, we started adding flavors, and our line grew to about 20 different flavors, I would say scale that down and focus on, 4 to 6 versus 20. It just, it's easier for inventory purposes and cash flow, and it definitely spreads you thin when you've got so many different varieties. And so I would test market more varieties to narrow down your best sellers.
Tim, I think those are two excellent pieces of advice, especially the distributor margin piece, that even if you're not selling to distributors initially, assume at some point that you are, so that you build that into your pricing model. Otherwise, you find this bit of a surprise in terms of your margin squeeze. So I want to thank Tim Kearney, who's the owner of Naturally Nutty Foods, who's been with us today on Food and Wine Insider. And I'm going to turn it back to Don to be sure that we have your website and information about you for our listeners.
Thank you very much.
Tim Kearney, your website for our listeners so they can learn more about you?
Is naturallynutty.com.
Oh, well, this is radio, so please spell it out for our audience.
So it would be naturallynutty.com.
Well, thank you for being with us. A link to your website will be on foodandwineinsider.com tonight, where you can hear this and every other past and future program. And by the way, if you have a guest you'd like us to talk with, please let us know right on the website. Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you both.
I really enjoyed it. And best of luck to you.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. To be successful, most restaurant owners require extra capital from time to time. When you need funding to renovate, buy equipment, or manage cash flow, you don't have time to track down financial statements or wait weeks for a decision. That's where Cabbage can help. Cabbage gives small businesses access to a line of credit of up to $200,000. Apply online and you'll get a decision right away. Since Cabbage is a line of credit, you can take the exact amount you need. You never have to reapply to take additional loans, and you'll only pay for the funds you use. Cabbage has helped more than 230,000 businesses from every industry. And with $4 billion in funding, Cabbage is A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau and was named the Forbes Top 100 Companies twice in a row. Check out Cabbage at cabbagewithak.com/foodandwine, and you'll get a $50 gift card when you qualify. That's KABBAGE.com/foodandwine.
Line of credit is subject to credit approval. See terms and conditions. All Cabbage business loans are issued by Celtic Bank, a Utah-chartered industrial bank, member FDIC.
Hi, this is Ann Daw, host of Food and Wine Insider, and I am here today with Liz Moskow. She's the Culinary Director of the Sterling Rice Group, which just published their 6th annual Culinary Trends Report. Welcome to Food and Wine Insider, Liz.
Thanks so much for having me.
Liz, before we get into the report on what consumers should expect will translate probably from their restaurant experiences to their grocery carts, let's talk a bit about you. What were you doing before you came to the Sterling Group over 2 years ago?
Sure. So actually, I have a history of being a serial entrepreneur. I started as a chef, graduating from the Culinary Institute of America way back when, and owned a restaurant for several years in the catering business. Grew that to multiple locations, and then worked as a private chef for quite a while on Park Avenue, New York City. And then as someone in their 20s might do, decided that the restaurant business was very difficult and started to work in the health and fitness industry, where I would teach yoga, health and wellness, and owned a yoga studio in New York. And then kept my foot dabbled in the food space, as you do when you have a background in hospitality and food, and did a bunch of consulting for restaurants and allergy consulting, gluten-free restaurant consulting, things of that nature. And then went on to actually start a CPG business in lip balm, which was on Shark Tank about 3 years ago. We didn't get a deal, mind you, but we did really well. We ended up on the shelves of Target with a company called Bomb Chickie Bomb Bomb, which is no longer selling product, but did learn a lot about CPG, food and beverage, health and wellness, and obviously cooking and personal chefing and restaurant ownership. And so combined all of those things and became a consultant for other people who are looking to combine a lot of those industries.
So what attracted you to the Sterling Rice Group?
So Sterling Rice is a really interesting company in that we're not just an agency, we're also an innovation firm. So it has a lot of elements of interest for me in particular and a lot of our clients because we bring to the table this culinary knowledge as well as the understanding of how to activate brands in the foodscape. And so it really combined all of my skill sets into one space. So very rare to kind of weave the story with an interesting, varied history like mine and make it make sense when working for a company. But Sterling Rice Group allowed me to really take everything that I learned in my comprehensive cumulative career and put that to work for our customers.
I almost think that it would be just picking your brain with all of your experiences on what the consumer should expect. But please talk about what you and your team do to determine the insights on what consumers should expect in the next year. Talk about things like who you interview, some of the key questions that you ask that really sort of delve into the insights you develop, because it's more those insights that I think are very important, not, oh, this is what's happening or that's what's happening. It's how do the insights sort of translate into behavior, I think is really critical.
Sure. So, yeah, this is a question I've been working on quite a bit with the rise of artificial intelligence and the conversations we have with some people who try to sell us this food prediction software of how you sort of defend your relevance against big data, right? And so what I think we have to offer, not just in that space of not getting replaced by a robot, but also with these in-depth insights, is that we look at the culinary landscape a number of ways. Number one, Sterling Rice Group has a cache of over 170 different people on what we call our Culinary Council. These people are made up of chefs, people who've appeared on the show Top Chefs and top chefs from around the globe. We also speak to nutritionists and people who've commercialized food for big chains and for shelf. And we really stay in touch with them throughout the year, several times a year, and we talk to them about what they're seeing in their world. So whether that's in fine dining, what are they seeing in menus in the city that they live and work in, what are their purveyors bringing to them that people might not see in different parts of the country and the world. We talk with nutritionists, dietitians, and even cutting-edge health practitioners on what are they recommending in the world of supplements or even supplement foods for their customers and their patients. And we kind of look at the fringes there, and we see what starts migrating into the food space, whether that's in restaurants or on the shelf at Natural and Organic, or even we take a lot of time to spend at places like Expo West and the Natural and Organic shows, and we walk the shows and we talk to people who are launching new products. Specifically, Expo West that happens in Anaheim in the spring is a great space to really get on the ground floor of that innovation cycle for a lot of these companies. And sometimes we'll see some products that have really interesting ingredients that might be executed really well, but we also might see some companies that are struggling a bit, but they're on to the right idea. So we take all of these insights that we're gathering from our boots on the ground Culinary Council, from the cues that we're seeing at shows, and then also the internal culinary team that I lead at SRG. Everyone on our team is constantly on the scout, whether that's a food insight newsletter or a flavor in the menu magazine, for example. We're constantly scouting. Even every time we travel, we're looking at things like the United Hemispheres magazine to see what's creeping in from the global landscape that's going to affect food and food on shelf.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, we're here today with Liz Moskow. She's the Culinary Director of the Sterling Rice Group. Liz, so when you think about all of those things and you bring it all together, what is the underlying thread that ties all the new flavors and ingredients and market forces together?
Every year that changes slightly, and it's really influenced by what's happening in the ether, in the sociology landscape, technology, in the environment, and political landscape. So as things change in that ether, food trends shake out differently. So this year, what was really important was, and these themes come out after we sort of look at what trends are popping out, right? So you kind of see what's that common thread. And this year it was really about how humans and consumers in general are looking to optimize everything, right? So they don't want to just eat a snack. They want to eat a snack that's going to make them smarter. Or they don't want to just taste something. They want to taste something that also looks beautiful on Instagram, that has a deep, complex flavor, and tastes like something they've never had before from a far-off land. So everything consumers are doing nowadays with the access to data and information at their fingertips with their iPhones is really to optimize an experience. And we're really seeing that translate out through the food trends this year.
So maybe people are thinking more about what they're putting in their bodies, which is almost sort of like going back to the beginning in terms of how food nourishes you, it helps you, it keeps you healthy, all of those things. It's quite fascinating, I think. What technological advancements do you think are influencing what we eat?
For sure. This one's big this year. There's a lot of new companies out there, specifically a company that I've been talking to a little bit to learn more about because it just launched called Spoonshot, which came out of a tech incubator called Techstars. And what they do, or what they're attempting to do, is really scan these giant data sets. Like humans, for example, I could look all year at consumer preferences and inputs from different places in the foodscape and never be able to grasp the amount of data that goes into these analysis of this software. So it's really changing the way that restaurants, chefs, proprietors, supply chain is working in the food space. So all of this data input is going in, computers are crunching the numbers, and they're finding out what's really interesting to put on the plate? What may consumers be resonating with according to the data that we're getting in real time? So what had been happening traditionally up until recently is that people were able to analyze the food trends by looking at sell-through rates on shelf or looking at what the biggest mover on a menu set might be or a menu mix. And what they were finding was what was happening after the fact. And so the rise of this big data mining is really allowing restaurant proprietors and CPG companies to get a real leg up on what might be happening in real time so that they can act on those insights as opposed to being too late to the game by finding the information afterwards. And I think that's really exciting for food because people can really start to get dialed in on food preferences and flavors that appeal to them more rather than digging through the guesswork, trying packaged foods that might not appeal to them and wasting money, et cetera.
Now, I think that's a really fascinating point, and it's been in my experience that it's the smaller players that tend to take the risk and tend to try different things and tend to push at the edges versus necessarily the large CPG, as you said before, the consumer packaged goods companies. Case as well. Yeah, it's interesting. Over the past several years, that natural organic and what I call the fringe is really where all the innovation and influencing is coming from, where traditionally, let's say 10, 15 years ago, you were seeing the top chefs in the fine dining restaurants driving food trends and consumer preference, and that was dripping down into consumer packaged goods. But now with people's interest in health and food and transparency in food, they're really looking to the natural and organic space to be that leader and finding out what's next for them. And so it's interesting to see what bubbles up out of that natural and organic space and goes mainstream. Take a product like kombucha that, was just this hippy-dippy drink not that long ago.
And we're starting to see that pretty much all over CPG, but also in fine dining where you'll see the kombucha of the day on tap as an alternative to a wine or a beer. And that's just sort of an example of products that kind of have started to move that way. And it's really interesting because I think when you start in the natural and organic space, people are a little bit more health-minded. And so it's really generally influencing the trajectory of what people eat for the better.
Liz, probably the toughest question I'll ask you, but you probably have a really good answer, is how do you distinguish between a trend and a fad?
It's a really good question. Some of it is sort of gut, right? The gut understanding of what is kind of ridiculous and what might be interesting in the moment. But a lot of it has to do with some of the work we've developed at Sterling Rice Group as a way that we look at the food landscape. It's called our culinary shifts. And when the culinary shifts are our lenses we put over what's happening in the culinary scape. And we then determine how many shifts is this particular trend touching upon. So, for example, one of the shifts is we call global embrace. And global embrace is the desire for consumers to really want to explore through food. And that might not be through actual travel, but it might be sort of allowing their taste buds to travel. So it's understanding who, abroad is bringing in these recipes. Are they traditional ancient cuisines, and whether it's ancient grains or a curry from India, right? That would all fall under global embrace. So let's look at the rise of ramen, right? Ramen at its core is really just sort of a chicken noodle soup, right? It's the same sort of thing. It's comfort food, but it comes from abroad, so it's global embrace. We have a shift called comfort and community, which makes people attached to nostalgia when they're eating and also sort of their own familial group. And so you look at all these shifts, and we currently have 10 of them. And however many shifts apply to a trend means that this particular trend has a lot more legs than something fleeting. So, for example, the unicorn food trend, right? Think that they're super color, super glittery, or super gold. Well, that's interesting for the moment and very fleeting, right? And that it does fall under our sensationalism trend. But that's really the only trend that it falls under. So we would look to that unicorn trend and say, hey, this is definitely a fad. And we wouldn't tell, for example, consumer packaged goods to really innovate in that area unless they were a very sort of Instagram forward type brand who were just doing limited time offerings, right? So we wouldn't say, put all your money in this basket and let's make some, snacks that are covered in gold and red, orange, yellow, green, and blue for the long term. So that's one way we really look at what's happening and sort of apply our kind of strategic thinking in the culinary landscape to figure out where our clients should play in the innovation space.
Well, really extraordinarily helpful, Liz. And again, this is Ann Dawn. I'm host of Food and Wine Insider, and I'm here today with Liz Moskow, who is the Culinary Director of Sterling Rice Group. So let's talk about, you have a top 10 list of key trends. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about a couple of them. You have there's two that I'm particularly interested in. Butter is the new bacon. Can you talk a little bit about that particular?
Sure, that was a fun one. Butter is the new bacon. So this is a personal theory, that back in the 90s when the Atkins diet was popular, I remember hearing all of my parents' friends at the time who were on the Atkins diet losing a ton of weight say, and I quote, I could eat all the bacon I want, right? That was sort of the draw for going on this weight loss, extreme weight loss diet. And then from there, if you look, from the 90s, bacon really attained this star status, right? You were starting to see bacon pop up everywhere. Candied bacon, bacon maple donuts, bacon and Bloody Marys. And all of a sudden, nobody could stop talking about bacon or adding it into their next innovation. And much like that, I see butter has sort of started to attract that same sort of food celebrity where the keto diet is now sort of the new Atkins diet. And they really push for eating the majority of your calories coming from fat. Couple that with the fact that people are understanding that fat, particularly in the dairy space, when they're shunning skim milk and opting for whole fat dairy, and butter and grass-fed butters and naturalness of butter as opposed to sort of a butter substitute or a margarine or a trans fat. And so they've sort of attached this fuzzy moniker to, butter. It has this great halo now, and butter's delicious. So every time you tell someone that they have permission to eat something that they thought was bad for them, it becomes trendy, right? So as a rule, I think you could tell people a number of years ago that chocolate's good for cognitive health, and you give them permission to drink and eat chocolate at any part of the day, and that's going to be something that people latch onto. Similarly with bacon in the 90s and up until today, and now butter, we're starting to see butter as a flavoring agent everywhere. So even donut places are calling out butter not only as an ingredient, but as the icing. So it's a buttercream or a brown butter donut. We're seeing butter, different kind of butter bars pop up at some high-end hotels as an Instagram worthy photo of people making all sorts of different interesting flavored compound butters to flavor anything from a new steak to a burger. And so, butter's delicious. It's been one of those items that chefs have been using to make food taste delicious since the beginning. Right? You ask any chef, how do I make this recipe better? They'll say, I'll add butter or I'll add salt. And so finally, people are just really embracing that butter is sort of this awesome staple that they can put in everything, and it's delicious. And so that's sort of my take on why it's getting this sort of food celebrity status. But again, butter is one of my own personal favorite foods. So I could see how that it makes sense across the board.
Another trend that Sterling Rice Group has identified is bitter is the new sweet. And I happen to love bitter things. Oh, by the way, on butter, I've only ever used butter in this household. My husband refuses to see anything but butter in this household. So I guess
she was ahead of the trend.
There we go. But talk a little bit about bitter is the new sweet.
Sure. So obviously a trend that's been sort of creeping for a couple of years now is this vilification of sugar. People are trying to eat less sugar. Sugar's the devil. And with that, Americans in particular are really attached to sugar, and to the point where they'll go through sort of a withdrawal when they try to decrease their sugar intake from everything from their morning coffee to even as an addition in sort of sauces and ingredients when they're cooking throughout the day, or even in restaurant food where they realize that there's pretty much sugar in everything they're eating, and they start to zero in on eliminating sugar. They realize that food needs other flavor elements to be delicious. I don't know if I'm assuming you're familiar with Sumit Nostran's Salt, Fat, Heat book and new show, where she really talks about sort of this understanding of flavor profiles in order to be a better cook. And I think one of the great flavor profiles that has been shunned by the American taste palate over the years because it's really been focused around sugar for so long is bitter. And I think Americans are finally ready to really start embracing, not just exploring that bitter taste profile. So if you look at kale, the popularity of kale over the past number of years, people understand that bitter can be flavorful. Brassicas like Brussels sprouts and things of that nature are creeping onto plates more and more. And then just experimenting with broccoli rub and dandelion greens and collards and endives and things like that in salads. But where we really started seeing it pop this year was in the craft cocktail space when that Aperol Spritz came to the forefront as the summer cocktail of the year. I know personally during the 4th of July, we couldn't find Aperol on the shelf anywhere in Denver. It had become sort of this cult thing this summer where people couldn't get enough. And while Aperol is also very sweet, that Amaro flavor is also very bitter. And it's sort of creeping into that mixology space as well, where we're seeing all sorts of bitters be employed in different mixed drinks as well. And consumers are really ready to embrace that flavor. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that in 2019 and beyond.
I wonder if, and I've seen it for sure in the whole alcohol area for certain, but I wonder if the bitter is related a little bit to the what you call rooted and ravishing trend because as you were talking about vegetables and maybe there's some of the more bitter vegetables. I happen to love Brussels sprouts, by the way. But, this sort of hearty, veggie-centric main dish options. It's cassava, it's Japanese yams, it's parsnips, which people don't even think about parsnips. Jicama, which is a wonderful vegetable from Mexico, and even white potatoes, and using them in new forms. Maybe talk a little bit about that particular one, because I certainly would love to see people eat many more vegetables and have there's a lot more variety in vegetables than there probably is in anything else that you can put on your plate.
Of course. Well, yeah, this one's near and dear to my heart. As somebody who had been a vegetarian for many years, was very interested in exploring the different properties of vegetables, but no longer I'm vegetarian, but still really make the root, no pun intended, of my diet chock full of vegetables. And any vegetarian, along with people who just sort of eat vegetables as the mainstay and sort of eat meat sparingly, can tell you they're not as filling as eating meat or fat, right? So with this whole plant-based revolution we're seeing, and I'll call it a revolution, where people are trying to eat less meat and more vegetables, or just add more vegetables to their diet in general, you have this whole area of satiety that needs to be, I'll just say, filled, right? So when you're ideating and innovating around plant-based foods, people want to see a little bit more natural ingredients used, where some of the meat replacers, like the Beyond Meats and the Impossible Burgers of the world, are really trying to solve that plant meat replacer from sort of a science perspective. There's this whole other contingency of consumer that just wants to eat as close to nature as possible. And so root vegetables, because they are heavier than, say, a green or a bean or something like of that nature, they really supply that belly fill that you need when you're placing meat and fat in your daily intake. So, for example, a lot of people were having, a white rice or a quinoa as the base. People are understanding that grains may or may not be good for them depending on who you're reading, whether if you're reading Grain Brain or you're following a paleo diet. It depends on which philosophy you're subscribing to at the moment. But root vegetables really can replace a grain or a rice or even a gluten-based belly fill in a bowl, for example, where you can then top it with any other kind of vegetable or even meat sparingly and sauces and things of that nature. So thinking of like the new rice bowl as a bowl full of Japanese sweet potatoes, or a bowl that has sort of a mashed potato base with a vegetable puree swirled into it, and then on top of that, you're then adding your different flavors and inclusions. So it's just looking at vegetables in a different way. I'm also seeing a lot of fried yuca in replacement of typical French fries. I'm seeing Japanese yams pop up all over, from fine dining to fast casual. And it's just a real interesting way to add satiety and also flavor. A lot of those root vegetables are full of flavor, and so it really shifts a consumer's taste into really enjoyment of vegetable.
Yes, definitely. Well, this is Ann Dom, host of Food and Wine Insider, and I'm here today with Liz Moskow. She's the Culinary Director of the Sterling Rice Group. So, Liz, were there any surprises in the list for you this year?
Yeah, I'm going to say I didn't expect lettuce to ever be exciting. And this is one that we really gathered from our Culinary Council and then kind of created a point of view around. We put out our yearly questionnaire to our Culinary Council and said, hey, what are you guys seeing that's interesting? What are you playing with in your restaurant? What are you serving that people are really responding to? And more than one occasion, we saw different varieties of lettuce and or just the fact that lettuce is being used in different ways pop up, and I started looking at how could that be.
That's terrific, Liz, and I wish we had more time to chat. Liz, tell us about your website for where people can learn more about the Sterling Rice Group.
Sure, it's pretty easy. It's SRG, S as in Sam, R as in radish, G as in green.com. And we have a list of all 10 of the trends for this year there, and you could find more about Sterling Rice Group in general.
This interview will be on foodandwineinsider.com tonight, and you can listen to this and all previous shows and those that are upcoming. There's also a survey you can fill out to give us some advice on what guests you would like to hear.
Have a passion for food, wine, and profits, and think of our program, Food and Wine Insider.